Yes, hello, and thank you for downloading another podcast from your friends at BBC Radio 2. Another new year of confessions. The first audio array of 2016. More terrible tales coming up, all seeking forgiveness from the Caring Collective. This week's concise collection features a coiffured canine catastrophe, that'll work, a cross-dressing chaperone's charm offensive, a wonky Walkman wrangle, and a takeaway terror. Here it all comes. First of this year comes from Noodles. Thank you, Noodles. There's a kind of a post-festive period feel to this one. Father Simon and the Holy Collective of All Things Forgiving. A few years ago, my wife and our pet Labrador, Boo, and I moved into our first home of our own, having previously rented a flat. A small two-bedroom terrace in a busy street. Every day, be it rain or shine, being the nice person or possibly saint that I am, I always made the point of wishing any neighbours I saw out about the street a very good morning in an effort to brighten everyone's day. A couple of days into our new residence and late into the afternoon, we noticed people had put their general rubbish, black wheelie bins, out into the street. I retrieved ours from the back garden and wheeled it out onto the pavement with everyone else's. Just as I did so, I heard a bit of a commotion coming from the vicinity of our immediate next-door neighbour. A little old lady appeared via the back gate and sadly seemed to be really struggling to get her wheelie bin out to the pavement via her higgledy-piggledy path. I immediately sprang into action by introducing myself to her and offering to put her bin out every week to save her the hassle. She was delighted and gratefully accepted my offer. This I made a point of doing every week without fail. Now, normally, as I used to wheel the emptied bin back up the path, the dear little old lady would be watching from the downstairs window and would wave to me, and I would obviously wave back. As the weeks went by, my wife introduced herself as well, and the lady next door explained how she had lived alone for many years after sadly losing her husband a few years previously, and how she rarely either left the house or saw anyone. Well, my wife offered our help and gave her our telephone number just in case she needed us at any time. On this particular day, I was in the kitchen making a cuppa, and Boo, our Labrador, was outside running around in the back garden, vigorously shaking his head as he charged about. "Oh no," I shouted. "Boo! Oh no!" I shouted. "Boo's caught a bird or something and is shaking the poor thing to bits." The wife from upstairs shouted back for me to go out and retrieve the poor creature from Boo's jaws. Very reluctantly, I set about trying to trap Boo in an attempt to remove the obviously by now deceased creature. This I eventually managed, retrieving a mangled mess of brown hair with a hint of blue. I put the late creature in a plastic bag and disposed of it in a black wheelie bin. Heading back indoors to wash my hands, my wife called out, "Did you manage to get it, and what was it anyway?" Well, I'm no spring watcher, Simon, but I replied, "Well, I think I got it, but I think it might have been a small animal or bird. It was difficult to see, really. It was in a chewed-up state." A couple of years later, it was bin day again, and I'd forgotten to put ours out, as I normally would have done the night before. Anyway, hearing the bin lorry coming down the street, I leapt from my bed and, dressing gown on, whizzed our bin out and the little old lady next doors, just in the nick of time before the council man, driving his bin lorry with his band of oh-so-happy helpers, got to our bins. I returned ours to the back garden, but this time the dear old lady from next door wasn't at the window with her normal thank-you wave. Instead, there was a little old man there, and he seemed to be watching me with his hands up to his face, like he was embarrassed to be seen. Well, I waved anyway, and I carried on.
Wow, this is really intriguing.
I then explained to my wife about seeing a little old man next door who seemed to be trying to hide his face from me. My wife, true to her way, panicked and
I've just worked it out.
Rushed round to see if the little old lady was okay. A minute later, she came back into ours in a panicky state. Fearing the worst, I said, "What's up?" My wife explained that it wasn't a little old man next door that I'd seen. It was indeed a very distressed little old lady, neighbour of ours, but now a bald little old lady. Busily spooning in my cornflakes at the time, I choked as I repeated, "Bald?" She went on to explain how the poor lady was, unbeknownst to us, a wig wearer, and she decided to wash it the other day, and she'd hung it on the clothesline to dry, but some devilish person had stolen it. My wife said, "How can anyone be so mean?" And just then the penny dropped. OMG! I said, one of our fence panels was down in the back garden, and it was no thief that had stolen the old lady's wig off the line. It was our very own Boo. There was no poor creature in its mouth after all. It was her one and only wig. Now it was my wife's turn to be horrified. "What did you do with it?" "What do you mean, what did I do with it? I threw it in the black bin, the bin that's just been emptied." We were both horror-struck. "Quick," says my wife, "the bin men have only just been... Go and retrieve it from them." "But I haven't given them a festive tip. They're hardly likely to do me a favour, are they?" "Leave it to me," says the wife angrily. She grabs a packet of ageing mince pies from the cupboard before legging it out to the door and off to the bin lorry. And before you could say dusty bin, she had them rummaging around through the garbage until they found the little blue bag. Inside was a mass of brown hair which, due to the bag now having holes in it, was covered in food waste, including tea bags and leftovers from a curry.
Oh, what?
My wife made out to the bemused bin men that the bag's contents were a Christmas gift for a friend. Never one to be beaten, my wife washed the wig in the washing machine, and I was left to sneak it back onto the old lady's line after dark via the broken fence panel. A couple of days later, my wife saw the little old lady, who was very, very happy. All was well, and she joyfully explained how the thief must have thought better of it and had replaced it back on the line. Well, that's the end of my tale. Sinner or Saints, will let you decide, says Noodles with a... you might have guessed what was coming, but it's a little bit of a shocker. Let's see what you make of this, Sister Bobby from the Priory.
Well,
what are you saying?
all's well that ends well, really, because actually she got her wig back and no loss, and there was no loss of a little fluffy animal either, which I'm really relieved.
No, and no one was trying to upset anybody.
Okay, all good. As you say, it's a lovely, lovely story where everything is okay, and also maybe her hair was better after the wash in the washing machine and kind of restyled and back on it. Well, you just never know, do you? So maybe it was grateful. One thing you're not forgiven for, though, is not giving the bin men a festive tip and then trying to palm them off with an old box of mince pies. Not forgiven for that.
How many mince pies are you trying to palm off at the moment?
64.
64, there you go. Brother Matthew.
Well, a couple of things spring to mind here. Number one, how on earth do you get a wig mixed up with a dead creature? I'm not Mr. Springwatch either, but I would be able to tell the difference between a hairpiece and a dead bird.
You never know.
No, I definitely would. And the other thing is well played to wife of Noodles, who manages to go out and not only persuade the binman to stop, because obviously they're on a very tight rota and they need to get it down this street and then off to do somewhere else, but also that she's able to spot their bag, because I'm not convinced I'd be able to spot my own bin bag in the back of a bin lorry. So I am going to forgive Noodles' wife, who
Mrs. Noodles, I
Mrs.
believe.
Noodles, that we're not naming. Yes.
So tonight's confession comes from Jay. Thank you very much indeed for tonight's tale. Father Simon and the Forgiving Collective, I have changed the names of all the people in this confession to protect the innocent. This confession goes back to the early 90s, when I was a young man in my early 20s, slim and with long hair. I've always liked dresses and makeup, and with the help of a school friend, a real girl, let's call her Anna, I had become very good at passing myself as female. Unless you knew me well enough to recognise me, I didn't draw any suspicion from the general public. For the purpose of this confession, I used the name Jenny when I was dressed as a girl. Of course, going outside always carried a risk of being discovered, but the excitement was worth it, and Anna always came with me for support. We were always cautious as to where we went, avoiding local towns and cities in favour of driving a little further afield to avoid friends and family. This particular Saturday, Anna and myself, dressed as Jenny, had been out to the shops in a city a short drive away. Everything had gone well, and we were starting to get a bit hungry. Looking around, we found a well-known hut that served pizza, if you know what I'm saying. We decided to go there. We entered the restaurant, and the door didn't have time to close behind us before two guys walked in, sneaking a look at who had followed us in a sense of panic. Behind us, it was Mike, not his real name, and another guy who I didn't recognise. Now, Mike had gone to school with Anna and me, and although Mike and I were never friends, we certainly did know each other. He'd been a bit of a bully at school, to be honest, and used to take great enjoyment from calling boys like me who were not interested in sport and certain football matters, called us certain names. I don't have to tell you exactly what they were, I'm sure you can guess. I knew that as soon as he realised who I was, my secret would not be so secret anymore. He would take great delight in broadcasting it to anybody and everybody, even to everyone in the restaurant at that moment. I braced myself for the embarrassment ahead, but it never came. Mike saw Anna and was delighted to have bumped into her. Before I had a chance to make an excuse to leave, the waitress was showing us to a table for four. We piled onto the bench seats. Anna sat next to me, and the guy sat across the table from us. Mike sat directly opposite me. "Who's your friend?" Mike says to Anna. Anna gave me a look that said, You want to be a girl? This is what real girls have to deal with. Well, this is Jenny, she says. We work together. Mike introduced his friend, let's call him Jack, who went to college with Mike. Well, Mike then turned his attention to me. Mike had a bit of a reputation for going through girlfriends like there was no tomorrow, and today it would appear that it was Jenny's turn. He was certainly laying it on thick, trying to impress the new girl that he'd just met. It was cringeworthy, Father Simon, but I was very polite. I laughed at his jokes and accepted all the compliments. Luckily, I didn't have to do much of the talking because Mike was so full of himself. When he said his job was a vision technician, I nearly spat a mouthful of pizza at him because I knew for a fact that he worked for a window cleaning company. So that's what he never suspected Jenny was anything else but his next conquest. Mike invited us to go with them to a gig in a pub around the corner. This is the reason that they'd travelled to this town on this day. We declined the offer, but before we went our separate ways, Mike gave me his phone number and asked for mine. I obliged, but changed one digit so the number would be useless. I'm sure all the women out there have done the same kind of thing at this point. Mike and Jack insisted on paying for the whole meal. We didn't stop them. They were just trying to impress. The following day, Anna received a call from Mike. He had tried to call Jenny, but his call kept going through to the wrong number. Even though Anna promised Mike that Jenny would call him, the call was surprisingly never made. And over the next few weeks, Mike did keep asking about Jenny. And after a while, Anna told him that Jenny had moved to Canada due to an offer of promotion at work. Mike never kept in touch with Anna, and the story was almost forgotten, but that is not the end. Anna and I are now married and we have a family. I'm now in my early 40s, and to be honest, Jenny hasn't been seen for a while due to my dad bod, a beard, and the fact that my hair has almost all gone. Last year, Anna and I attended a friend's birthday party, and among the guests was Mike. After all these years, the first thing Mike said to Anna was, "Have you heard anything about Jenny? Do you still keep in touch?" Anna said that she had lost touch some years ago, and the last thing she knew was that Jenny was married with kids. Mike is still single, having never met the right girl, and maybe, I'm thinking, Father Simon, he's been holding out all these years for Jenny to return his call. And so, therefore, this is the point of the confession. I need to ask forgiveness for not letting on to Mike and Jack who they were talking to. We let them pay for our meal with their hard-earned cash, and I feel I earned this due to the years of abuse at school. However, I ask forgiveness for maybe being the reason that Mike has never settled down and had a family of his own. Maybe no girl ever measured up to me, i.e. Jenny, says Jay. Yours hoping for forgiveness. Well, it was a different tale, and I think a very interesting one. So, Jay/Jenny, thank you very much indeed for getting in touch. Here's an interesting story. What do you make of this, Sister Bobby from the Priory?
Oh, wow. I mean, my heart was in my mouth for a minute because I was thinking,
which way is this going to go?
Well, yeah. I mean, it took real courage, actually, to sit down and have dinner with Mike and kind of see that side of him. I think, of course, you're forgiven, actually, because you had to. You have to. Yeah, there was no way you were going to survive that, really, long term, if you didn't actually just keep up the Jenny facade. I mean, actually, it's not a facade, is it? You are Jenny. So I think it's exactly forgiven, unforgivable. Yeah. And it is actually interesting that he never lost his heart to anyone else. There you go.
It's a good story. Jay, thank you very much indeed. Bobby, thank you. Matt, what do you make of this?
Yes, I've got a theory as to why
I'm sure you have.
Mike has remained single all these years. I don't think it is just because nobody could quite measure up to Jenny. Mike's just not a pleasant person, and you reap, frankly, what you sow. And here's why the candle's still burning, sunshine, and why everyone's changing their digits when they're giving you their phone number, is maybe if you were a nicer bloke, they wouldn't be changing their number. So I am definitely going to forgive, and Mike, this is what's coming.
Here comes tonight's confession, which comes from Mark. Thank you very much indeed, via the email. Dear Father Simon, Bobby from the Priory, who I have to say is the Queen of Smut. On the basis of the last minute.
It wasn't a product of forethought.
No.
And doubting Matthew. That's how you're being labelled.
Yeah, that's me.
I'm here to request forgiveness, a tale of what happens after Christmas. The story begins in about 1986. I was a 13-year-old boy, and it was the week before Christmas to start with. It's a cold, bleak day, stuck indoors with my big sister babysitting. Basically, this entailed the occasional grunt in my direction, but mostly she was parked in her bedroom reading smash hits and staying firmly out of my way, so I was bored. and left to my own devices. After a short while of trying to find something good to watch on TV, but remember in 86 that's not too much to excite a 13-year-old boy with 4 channels. Imagine that. I gave up and I did what I'm sure most children would do this close to Christmas. I went hunting for presents. It wasn't long until I struck gold. The cupboard in the dining room, hidden on the top shelf, is exactly where they were. Well, the usual stuff was all piled up and ready to go, but then my heart stopped. In a tiny, shiny, black and silver box was the holy grail of presents. In big, bold writing, the words, Walkman. Well, I'd spent the best part of the last 6 months hounding my parents for the said device. My friends all had them. I just wasn't cool until I had one as well, and my prayers had been answered. I took down the box and I held it lovingly in my hand, a Walkman of my own. Très cool, n'est-ce pas? Okay. Ridiculous French for no reason. So after a couple of minutes of caressing and ogling, I was suddenly bored. No batteries or tapes to play, so what could I do now? Well, I feel the need to explain what kind of 13-year-old boy I was. For my recent birthday, I'd received a junior toolkit. Since that point, nothing was safe. My inquisitive mind turned to how things worked, particularly how things worked inside. I'd taken apart many things. All my toys, hair dryers, even an old TV had succumbed to me and my trusty screwdriver. But obviously I wouldn't recommend that anyone tries any of this kind of thing
of this at
home.
No.
The Walkman sat in my hand, redundant and incapable of entertaining me further. The screwdriver found its way to the screws on the back. Before long, the back was off. Inside, I saw silver shiny bits. Something that looked like an electric whirry thing, and I revelled in the science and technology within. That's right, because they're very scientific and technological terms that you've used there.
Well done.
Again, my boredom kicked in, and I put the device back together, relocated the screws, and when I'd finished, no one would be any the wiser. Until I stood up, and from my lap fell what looked like a black, insignificant rubber band. Baffled, I picked it up, and then I heard keys in the front door. It was too late for me to discover what it did. My parents were back. I stuffed the band in my pocket, dived upstairs. My parents were none the wiser. I had narrowly escaped discovery. So we get to Christmas Day, and under the tree was a bounty of wrapped gifts. My bleary-eyed parents followed, and the chaos that's Christmas morning ensued. After 10 minutes, everything was unwrapped. Then my dad smiled knowingly and said, "We have one more very special present." Because he spoke like that, as though he had a smoking jacket. He disappeared and came back with the final present held proudly in his hands. It was the Walkman. I was handed some batteries and a handful of tapes. My father had toiled secretly and recorded all my favourite albums. Wow. ELO, Beach Boys, Adamant, all on glorious C120s, the thin ones that stretched a lot. We carefully set up the device and popped in the first tape, pressed play, and nothing happened. The Walkman whirred, but no music came out of the headphones. My parents were dismayed. Here was their son on Christmas morning, and his main present didn't work. Not good. I tried to look surprised and disappointed, but I had discovered that the black rubber band that I'd stashed under my bed was obviously an important part after all. So obviously I came clean and explained what I'd done. No, actually, I didn't, of course. A few days later, my father grabbed me and said, "Come on, son, the shops are open now. Let's see if we can't sort out this Walkman." So off we went into town to the popular high street electrical store where said item had been purchased. Now, my father, you should know, was affectionately known as Mr. Grumpy. He'd been banned by my mother from dealing with anything stressful, such as estate agents, banks, that kind of thing, because it was well documented that my father would often lose his patience and give people a piece of his mind. Not a pleasant experience for the other parties, I'm sure. So here I was, entering the shop with Mr. Grumpy. The store was busy, as you'd expect after Christmas, with everyone spending vouchers and Christmas money. When we finally made it to the counter, my father shoved the faulty Walkman under the nose of a spotty teenage sales assistant, loudly declared the item broken and he wanted his money back. I could sense the red mist descending on my father. Mr. Grumpy had arrived. This wasn't going to go well. What followed was some loud arguing about shop policy and how my father felt the injustice of a mere replacement, given the Walkman hadn't even made it out the box before it broke. He certainly wasn't going to trust a replacement to last. Needless to say, a manager was called and the battle continued. At one point, my father turned to me, pointed at my face and said, "Can you imagine his little face on Christmas morning when this blooming thing didn't work? Well, I can, and it ruined my Christmas." So there. Well, I did my best to look woeful and sad. After much drama and shouting at the assistant and the manager, my father beat them down, but not literally.
Good. Yeah.
And got his way. I think at this point people were actually beginning to leave the shop. Cash exchanged hands, and thankfully we were out of there. Off we went, cash in hand, to another popular electrical store, at which point my father bought me a much more expensive Walkman with mega bass and special extra bits. He was determined to get the best so I could avoid more heartbreak. So, as you can see, I need to beg forgiveness from my parents for sneaking around, finding and breaking my Christmas present, dealing with my fake disappointment, and for them spending much more money on me than I deserved. Mostly to the two shop assistants who were mercilessly verbally battered by Mr. Grumpy, my dad. I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive an inquisitive 13-year-old boy and his foolish ways. I now work in IT, and I'm still taking things apart with no clue as to what's going on. Well, it's a nice post-Christmas story. Thank you very much indeed. Lots of stuff going back. That was a classic exchange from 1986. Let's see what Sister Bobby from the Priory makes of all that and whether she's feeling forgiveness.
Well, the problem is, Mark, is I kind of forgive you to go hunting for presents. That's kind of what we all do. And the thing is about parents is sometimes they buy extra presents because Father Christmas knows you haven't been good. And what they do is they buy you presents just in case to make sure you got something to open.
Is that right?
So, yeah, they do. Otherwise you get nothing. And Mark's being naughty. So, of course, so the problem is, though, that's the point where you should have stopped and you know what you're doing was wrong. Because actually that might have been a present for somebody else. You assumed it was for you. Could have been for your 13-year-old sister. So what I really feel sorry for, though, is your dad having to fork out to go and buy a much more expensive one. So you're kind of half forgiven for the hunting, but you're not forgiven for taking it apart.
So is that yes or no?
Not
yes
forgiven.
No?
I said,
not forgiven.
It's 50-50. Not forgiven today,
it's
Mark.
a hung
not
jury.
Forgiven.
All right, Brother Matthew.
Clearly, Mark's dad wins Dad of the Week because not only does he buy him a Walkman, not only does he transfer all of his music onto tape, and then not only does he take him down to the shop, he gets him an even better Walkman at the end of it.
Mr. Generous, I call him.
He's just excellent, isn't he? What exactly were you expecting to see when you opened up the back of this Walkman? If you had no idea what your way around anything technical, you had no business taking the back off.
You wanted to see the shiny weary thing.
He expected to see little men inside playing guitars.
Yes.
That's basically what he was after. So I am going to say not forgiven. And I would forgive the dad, but the dad's got nothing to be forgiven for, so I am not going to forgive Mark.
So tonight's confession comes from Eve. Thank you very much indeed for this tale. Dear Father Simon, my story begins on a cold, dark, rainy winter's evening, circa 2005. My prison officer husband, I mention this just to make the jury aware that we are usually decent, law-abiding citizens, had just been discharged from hospital following a total knee replacement, and as a result was re-cooperating at home. Whatever that means. Leaving me solely responsible for running the household, the chores of which included feeding regularly and walking, maybe less regularly than she would have liked, our little Staffordshire Bull Terrier, and feeding and assisting my less than patient husband in his daily ablutions. Having finished an extremely stressful day at work and having already made the journey once at lunchtime to perform my caring-type responsibilities, fighting my way through the rush hour traffic, I returned home to find the dog crossing her legs and the patient, my husband, two words which really shouldn't go in the same sentence, sitting also cross-legged. But obviously not literally, as the consultant had told us that would be a definite no-no, as anyone who's had a replacement will testify. Having performed my Florence Nightingale and Barbara Woodhouse duties, I turned my attention to what culinary delights I would rustle up for our evening meal. See, Nigel, it's a classic Thursday. Quick as a flash, my husband said, "Can we have a takeaway?" I thought this was a bit speedy, really, but he was highly medicated. Well, I'd had a long day and was more than happy to go along with this, as truth be told, I'm not over keen on my cooking either. All right, then, I say, I'm going to call for a Chinese. Now, there were two very good takeaways. So we had one good one just 50 yards up the road from us, which we're going to call the Pleasure Palace. This is just across a very busy main road. We did sometimes use another Chinese takeaway, which we should call the Happy Inn. But that one was a car journey away, and as such, it was a bad night. We opted for the Pleasure Palace across the road. I picked up the menu, and I rang the number on it. 15 minutes, said the man. Fine. I wrapped up warmly and, armed with a brolly, set off on my hunter-gatherer quest. Telephone order, I announced as I was blown in through the doors. The lady gave me the order, and I was pleased to see it was all ready and keeping warm in the glass compartment. I paid the lady and left. Back home, plates warming, I unwrapped the order. "Oh, bother," I called to my husband. "They've given us the wrong order." As I pulled unrequested and undesired battered pork balls out of the bag. Well, ring them back and tell them to change it. It's not rocket science, was my husband's polite advice. I picked up the menu and dialed the number for the second time that night. Hi, I've just picked up a telephone order. You've given me someone else's food. Pause from the other end. Oh, okay then. What was the order? I repeated the original order. All right, he says, 15 minutes. Fine. So I set off once again with the offending wrong order in hand. After dicing with death in the traffic and eventually getting back across the road, I arrived back at the shop. I've just been on the phone. You gave me the wrong order. I've come to collect the right one, I say, threateningly. Actually, I just done the threatening bit. The lady looked at me a little bit nonplussed. Anyway, taking the offending wrong order from me, she scurried into the back and returned a moment later. What exactly did you order? Well, by now, as you can imagine, my temper was getting frayed. You mean you haven't got it ready yet? I've just given it to you on the phone, woman. I said this with disbelief, eyes rolling while simultaneously releasing a tut. I repeated my order one more time through gritted teeth. She scurried back into the kitchen once more. After 15 long, unnecessary minutes, interspersed with me pacing the shop floor and tutting at various intervals, the lady eventually appeared out of the back with my order. I'm sorry you had to wait, she says. Don't worry about it. I say, really, don't worry your face.
Because you're now 12.
You just made that up.
Yeah.
I was extemporizing a little bit, but it does say don't worry about it anyway. I left her with a final harumph. I left the shop, made my way home. Finally, as we tucked into our hard-earned meal, our dog waiting in anticipation for any leftovers, the phone rings. Did you order some Chinese? Yes, we're just eating it now. Very nice. No, you're not. It's still here on the blooming counter. Don't you ring here again. We've got your number. For some reason, I became the verger from Dad's Army just for a moment. I'll tell his reverence. And then the phone went dead. So you can guess what happened. This is a bit like our turkey. We had a double butcher turkey confession before Christmas. Father Simon, I need forgiveness, not only from the poor man in the next village who got 2 lots of takeaway orders ready that were never ever collected, not only for the poor lady behind the counter at the Pleasure Palace, not a sentence we've ever done in confessions before.
Yes, please.
Who got short shrift from me, but also the poor people whose telephone order I inadvertently took and whose order the shop would have had to make up again. 15 minutes, they'll never get back. In my defence, I was exhausted, and the menus were produced by the same printers and differed only by the restaurant name and the telephone number. Also, penance of a fashion has been served, as I've never been able to ring the Happy Inn ever again, because they've got my number. Please forgive me. Thank you in anticipation. That's from Eve. It's the problem. It's the 2 takeaway situation. Got the wrong one. Got a little bit irate. So, understandably, Eve needs your forgiveness. Novice Nigel.
Well, Eve had plenty of opportunities since then to make do. She could have gone round and apologised. She could have taken them some wine. She could have offered to pay for the 2 meals that were actually sitting there made for her through her own mistake, none of which she's done. I'm not sure how many years we're going back now.
It was 2005.
Yeah, well, so plenty of time in which to do it. We've got a whole decade, so I hope Prison Officer Hubby's knee is, thank you.
Well done.
English History and S-level, English A-level, no mouse. And total knee replacement. I hope that's all gone well, but Staffy sounds lovely. But on this occasion, absolutely not forgiven, Eve, because you've tried to get forgiveness from us, but the real people you should have asked for forgiveness are the people in the various shops, and you've not done that, so no wonder you haven't been back.
Bobby from the Priory. Then.
Yeah, I'm a bit with Nigel. You have done nothing to make amends. And the poor people that went without food, because surely when they turned up at the Pleasure Palace for their dinner, who sorted out the food for them? At the very least, what she could have done is gone, look, I need to pay for their dinner. I've took theirs. You've cooked it twice. I certainly put the cash back in the till and then order from the other one that you never went to the Happy Inn 4 times.
Everyone would have done exactly what Eve did.
No,
nothing.
they wouldn't have done.
Yes,
but also sort out your kitchen drawer menus, will you? Second drawer down.
Is that where they all go? Is that where they go? All right.
Second drawer down.
Brother Matthew.
I'd have done it, definitely. What I love about this confession is our decision to choose those names for the Chinese restaurants, Pleasure Palace and Happy.
I think
don't think there are no Chinese restaurants called either of those names anywhere.
They were Eve's choices. She changed them.
Really? Yeah. Also, is there really some kind of blacklist where they keep your number and you're never allowed to call there again? I doubt that. So I am going to forgive, because I would definitely have done the same thing.
Well, they were this week's confessions, and if you have one, maybe set it off for the new year. Come on. Tell us your story, confessions@bbc.co.uk. More in a week, and don't forget, you can listen to our guest interviews online. So we get in the book club author Ryan Groudin, who joined us on Monday. The one and only Paul McKenna was in talking charisma and influence. The wonderful John Ronson was talking to us on Wednesday about his new shows. And Nigel cooked up a gluten-free lasagna for our Foodie Thursday. Not bad for a first week back. See you next week.